You also add that
Sam says hi. Sam says hi.
Hi, Tom.
And Sam today, which day he ate all his vegetables.
I did, actually.
Oh, dinner.
That's what I was.
I'm just gonna put it out there.
All right. So we're miserable. How are you?
Excellent.
There you go.
See?
Look it up.
You survived.
It's warm outside, finally, and dry for now.
Well, for hours.
For an hour or so, yeah.
The sun's out for 2 hours and it's dry.
However, that's comment made was like totally spot on about
I
like
left it at home.
the world.
Good spot for it.
That is a good spot.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I'm okay. Like,
Yeah.
a little bit of rain, stuff.
Sorry, Terry.
I am not a flat person. It's gonna be my thing.
Are we ready?
I'm a stall.
Yes, we are.
So our regular chair, Cindy Maynard, is not able to be with us tonight, and she asked me if I chair the meeting, so we will begin, and the roll call will show that Councilor Grenier, Gardner, Coons, and Perry are present. And we're going to look at facilities, park, public works, and WPCF tonight. I understand that our town manager has some new information that will be shared as we go along. So we'll have to refer to our budget books and the new information. And with that said, I will turn it over to Sophie.
So we're gonna start this evening talking about facilities. It is in the yellow tab in your budget book. We've put in quite a bit of information regarding facilities for you to review. We're not anticipating any changes in operations. I think the biggest change you'll see is that our HVAC systems maintaining our HVAC systems is getting more costly for us. And so there are some changes there. Dave Pinkham is our facilities director. So he is here along with me to try to answer any questions you might have. I don't know if you need more of an in-depth overview or if you're good to just jump in.
We all set to jump? I think we're jumping.
Shall I jump first? I was just curious to hear more about ensuring appropriate oversight of building alarms. I mean, a lot of what was in the narrative was very self-explanatory, but I didn't quite understand what's behind that.
So in the past, we had not had all of our alarms tied in to actually ring to dispatch or to a dispatch center. So they would ring, and if people were walking by, they would hear it, but they didn't actually go anywhere. So Dave picked that up, and we've made the change, but that comes with a contract to oversee the alarm. The alarm company oversees it. So that's part of that change. The other piece, just in general terms, that is a shift. It's actually a shift we made in the last budget year. In the past, we had, as the authority having jurisdiction for life safety, done a lot of our own inspections, and it's the way it's always been done. And what we learned is the authority having jurisdiction should not inspect itself. So we've also built relationships, Dave has built relationships to get those inspections done so that we have adequate oversight.
Should we be keeping discussion of facilities capital expenses separate or as part of this
This is,
time, or?
I have everybody
Yep.
here to talk about capital at the same time.
While we're, before we get to capital, could we just get a little overview of the responsibilities of the different employees in this department?
Sure. So we have 3 employees in this department. Dave is the oversight. He's the director. He's dealing with vendor relationships, helping manage projects. He carries several professional licenses, so he's doing several of the projects for us. Then we have Wes, who is doing a lot of custodial. He manages most of the building cleaning and, if time allows, some of the special projects. But I will tell you, keeping all of the buildings clean is pretty much a full-time job. And Bob is doing a lot of the smaller projects. So, for example, we've got the pillars outside of the door that were beginning to rot. That is a Bob project. He's working on that. When we have, we've been trying to keep up with painting because it's protective. Bob does the lion's share of that. Anytime we need anything built, Bob is a very talented carpenter. Has been saving us some money. A lot of times the projects that Dave works on require 2 sets of hands for safety or just because it requires 2 sets of hands. So instead of taking taking Wes away from cleaning, it allows all of the daily custodial stuff to get done and the project to get done because we have an extra set of hands. On top of that, Bob is responsible for all of the winter maintenance downtown in terms of sidewalks and shoveling out all of the steps around the town buildings that we're responsible for, salting that. So that's in the winter. Bob is quite busy with that and the ice rink. He makes ice for the ice rink. He works with Mitch. Is that, if you recall, we had when we brought Bob on, we said that was a 50-50 position, doing work for the Parks and Rec facilities and doing facilities work. So Bob does, starting next week, we'll begin doing an awful lot of work at the pool to be getting it going. So if you notice, in the last few years, we've been able to repaint the pool on an annual basis so it doesn't get quite so tired looking. It also helps protect the infrastructure there. So have I given enough information? I can go further, but if that's good.
I know Wes cleans this building because I see him here often. Does he? What other buildings is he responsible for
The
cleaning?
library, which is multiple times a week because it's so heavily
Right.
used. The downstairs of the public safety building and the common area on the upstairs of the public safety building. This building, Keith Anderson House, Birch Street School, and the public safety common areas in the public works garage. So he does the break room and the bathrooms and the hallways.
Busy man.
He is very busy. Does a really nice job for us.
Other questions on facilities, either operation or capital projects?
The one thing that would just be interesting maybe for us to note is a year ago, we spent a lot of money on a boiler upgrade for this building, and public safety were tied together. As you may remember, all of our infrastructure is underground between the two buildings. We had anticipated some savings in energy use, and it's actually exceeded our expectations. So I think Dave did a really nice job putting together the plan and sizing the boiler and picking the boiler, because we're actually getting good heat and we're saving money.
Excellent. Nice to hear that.
I know you guys approve budgets all the time, and sometimes you might not hear the good news, just the bad news.
Is that reflected? Savings?
If you look in natural gas, you'll see that we are incrementally pulling that down.
There we go. Great.
So
Oh,
go
sorry,
right ahead.
I have, I guess most of my questions, or just what I'd kind of like to hear a little bit more about, aren't necessarily about this budget, but the projections.
Sure.
I'm just, it just seems very clear that there's just a remarkable increase in the projections for FY 2021 and FY 21-22 for, particularly for fire, for facilities, and for public works. And I know we're not making that budget right now, but it seems like there's a lot crammed into those 2 years at a time when we're also contemplating this RSU bond. So for the facilities aspect of it, or if you just want to speak generally to what the planning, the method behind the planning for a lot of these big ticket items being into the same 2 years.
So when you are talking, I'm assuming that you mean on the capital side.
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure we're on the same page. When you look at facilities, the biggest piece, the biggest driver in the budget is the renovation to the Keith Anderson House. And I think two things of that. It's a placeholder because we're currently working on evaluating it. Realistically, I'm not sure that doing anything in 2022 is going to be feasible. I don't want to lose it off the capital plan. And when I look at the capital plan, and as you're unfortunately going to hear from Rob, infrastructure is a huge concern for us. I'm not sure when you prioritize what our needs are that we're going to be able to afford that kind of a investment in the Keith Anderson House. Anyway, I don't know, but I think it's a priority in terms of looking at, we have this beautiful historic, not historic preservation, but of historic character building, and we're at a tipping point with it to either continue to treat it and just chop it up and lose a lot of that character, or perhaps try to salvage it. I have always anticipated that if there were sizable renovations to the Keith Anderson House, it would likely have to be done with borrowing from USDA or some other long-term lender to be paid back out of the tax increment financing district. So I think that I don't want to lose it, because I do think it's a valuable discussion for us to have, and council needs to give some priority to what we want to do with that building. And but at the same time, if you notice, there's also $250,000 of grants and note proceeds to offset that expense, because it's kind of like the Marden Park renovation. it's something that I think is really important that we should be looking at doing, but I also don't know that it would hit the priority to expend general fund tax dollars on it.
Yeah, thank you. Again, the reason that I bring this up, and I think particularly as we talk about facilities, public works, and fire, is it would be easy to just kind of look directly at the budget and in front of us, but I think that with what's going on with school and that bond question, and I think it might be useful to the public for us to talk a lot about what our imminent needs are going to be right around the corner, even if they're not reflected in this budget. Even if we kind of get by the skin of our teeth and not raise, taxes too much this year, there's a lot coming down the pike.
So there is. So we know that we are going to experience some significant increases around the operations of public safety delivery. On top of that, we have an engine that is going to need to be replaced in the next 5 years, and that's $400,000 to $450,000. Yes, if we can jump onto another joint purchase with the city of Bangor or another entity like we did the last one. We have a ladder truck that is about a $1.2 million expense that we expect to have to replace in the next 10 years. The smart thing would be to start saving money to be able to do that. This budget does not contemplate doing that because for either of those, yes. So that's on the public safety side. On the facility side, we're in pretty good shape to spend $20,000 to $30,000 a year on our current facilities plan minus the Keith Anderson House. And I think there are some things in there that are more discretionary. It would be great to add some amenities up at the pool. Is it mandatory? No. But when we look at kind of where pools are going, that's becoming more of an expectation. So that's kind of where we are with facilities. Talking with Rob, and I don't want to kind of jump into public works right away, but the elephant in the room is a major shift in the cost of capital infrastructure projects and a limitation on regional and state funding that we have relied on heavily to manage our routes so Forest Ave, Kelly Road, and Park Street all are in desperate need of rehab, varying degrees. When you add up what needs to happen there in the next 3 years, it's about $1.4 million. We had anticipated significant assistance from the state and our regional partner. That money's not going to be there. We'll talk to you about it next, but that's $1.4 million that we hadn't planned on that sees, Park Street alone sees about 15,000 cars a day. So it's not something that we'll be able to say, yeah, don't worry about it. So yes, we have significant costs coming up. And I do think people are trying their best to put budgets, my staff is trying really hard to put budgets together that are responsible. That the needs are far outweighing our ability to fund them.
Questions?
Facilities? I would like to come back to an item that we talked about the other night with Bell, and that is under facilities, and that's the office communication cable
Yes.
restructuring. It's under facilities, capital facilities.
It is page 10.
I assume that right now, things are working.
Yes. I will tell you, Tom, that I have lots of areas of municipal expertise. IT is not one of my strengths. I think what you will find with our cabling system is it's causing issues with the switch, which cause the system to fail. And then us have to troubleshoot to find where the issue is, and it's taking considerable amount of time to do that. But if you, from my perspective, sitting in my office, most of the time I can make a call, I can receive a call, and I can get my email and send my email. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, I for now.
I think that is a Bell.
Yeah, I think when, at some point when Bell is here, I would like to return to that item.
If Bell is not here and you'd like to return to that item, I will have answers when we next meet.
Oh, that's okay. Anything else under facilities? I think we're ready to move on.
You didn't even have to.
David, you put together a great budget.
So you do
Thank you.
realize that had I not asked him to sit here, you would have had lots of questions that I couldn't answer. Yes, it's just the way it goes. Thank you.
Being real math, what the real master is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, David.
Welcome.
And we're going to move on to WPCF, and that's not going to be quite so simple, probably.
It is not. So you folks know Joe Madigan, our superintendent of the WPCF?
We do indeed.
So I just want to remind folks that WPCF is a business-like enterprise or a proprietary fund, which means that it is not funded by general fund tax dollars. So changes you make to this budget will impact the sewer fund, but not taxes. Okay, so don't try to cut money here to save money on taxes. In fact, WPCF, because they're two separate funds, but the service is so integrated, we do billing, we do collections, the town manager is still the primary oversight in terms of HR and, non-direct operations. The WPCF actually pays the town $138,000 a year. And that's been, I jumped it when I first got here. When I promoted Joe, he said there'll be no more of that. And I kind of had to agree that 138 is a perfect number. So what I wanted to first do is to look at the expense side with you just briefly, and then we'll go back to the revenue side because the revenues have to equal expenses. In Joe's budget, which starts on page 8, the increase in his salary line, I just want to point out what we have are several newer operators, and the town places people on the WPCF pay scale in large part due to operator licenses and time in the seat, with the philosophy that the longer they stay, the more they gain and help us. When we hire newer people without licenses, getting them up through the licenses and their first few years on the job tend to be some substantial pay increases along the way. So I didn't want people to think that we were giving people just like a 4% raise. That has to do with people going through the onboarding process, which takes a few years. The other place I would want to point out to you is in electricity. We are experiencing a pretty significant change in the solids that are coming in through the system, and for process, Joe made the decision, at least while the university was here or in session, to put both sides of the plant online. As soon as you do that, you're running double well, maybe not quite
Not
double,
quite
but
double, but it's
a lot,
12 grand.
a lot more electricity use to keep the pumps and aeration system going. So this budget is assuming that we are going to end up doing that for at least a portion, having both sides running.
'Cause we did it January to middle of May. We just took it offline last week.
Go back on.
It'll go back on in September, probably.
No, I think we can hold off. It's the cold that slows down the microorganisms.
Hmm.
So once it gets cold, and then we need.
So it's not just the volume you're receiving, it's the environment in which your stuff works.
As the mixed liquor gets colder and colder, the microorganisms get logier and logier, and
And those microorganisms.
they just don't want to work.
Okay, understood. Anything else on the expense side of WPCF that we should look at?
Oh, I was curious about the dropped membership in MRWA.
And Maine Rural Water. So that was my decision. I made it with consultation.
Wasn't your decision? Also,
It was our
our
decision.
yes.
The town of Orono has historically been a member of Maine Rural Water Association and was happy to continue that. Last year, we saw a significant increase in the annual membership fee. So when we were putting the budget together and Joe and I talked, we said, let's keep an eye on what services we're actually getting from Maine Rural Water, and is it worth it at $600, is it worth it at $1,200, kind of the idea. And what we discovered is that while a worthwhile organization, no doubt, the majority of our training is coming from JETSI, which is another state of Maine primarily focused on sewer training organization. They handle all of our tabulation of training hours, which we need for the state. When we go to their trainings, they are spot on to what we need our people to learn. There's a lot of annual training that's required to maintain licensure for the state of Maine. Doing it through JETSI is meets our needs and the state's needs, if that makes any sense. So we had really kind of pushed away from Maine Rural Water training anyway. When we looked at the number of Maine Rural Water trainings we were going to, the number was so small that the justification between membership registration fees and non-member registration fees, we were going to so few that it didn't really make that much of a difference. And when we needed assistance, because we thought we had a water leak, we called Maine Rural Water and ended up having to go through Boyd and the water district to get them to come up and help. The water district had to make the call. So when I called the executive director, who I've known for 15 years, to express my concern, it really didn't seem like it was that important to Maine Rural Water, and Joe and I felt like if our money isn't important to them, it's important to us, and we don't see the value. So that's why we dropped that membership.
Mm-hmm.
We still remains very active in Maine wastewater utilities, JETSI.
Maine Water Environment.
Maine
Association,
Water,
yeah.
there we go. Me1, right? Whatever.
No, we.
MOIA, there we
Yeah.
go. And really feel like we need to make sure that the memberships that we are expending money on are of value, not just to be able to check a box.
So they're really driven by the price increase. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I called out the post office last week, when we're talking of price increases, I also see that our DEP licensing has gone up by $800, which is out of our control, right?
Yeah, unfortunately.
What about the lab supplies, the spectrophotometer.
Yep.
That's, I take it we're replacing a unit or?
I plan to replace the unit, Sam, because the other one was, like I said, it was purchased in 2001. It's something we use every day. And the technology has changed quite a lot. They come up, the new ones they call it a TNT testing tool, but it takes 10 readings around instead of one. It's just more accurate.
And this is the only one that we have?
Yes.
It's the cost of doing business, but just want to address that because it's $7,000. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is. So,
And the other labs,
$7,000 includes,
the increase, yeah.
right, that increase includes a SC200 controller as well.
Okay.
Which is a couple $1,000. So the spectrophotometer is about $5,000.
And the rest of the 5,000 from last year would be just regular lab supplies,
Yeah,
chemicals, blah, 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 right? Okay. Not the blah, 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 but you know what I mean, right?
The stuff we need to use.
I think it's important for people to understand that lab is used 7 days a week. It's quite impressive when you look at it.
Very important too.
Wastewater doesn't take a day off.
No, they don't even take an hour off. We have personnel tied to the wastewater plant, either by pager or in person, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if we don't, then Joe gets in trouble, and if Joe gets in trouble, I get in trouble.
So, Joe, I want to thank you for having given us that tour a little while back. I wish most citizens get an opportunity to see exactly what you go through in the day-to-day of your life, because it's actually quite significant and important. I'm just wondering if you could take a moment to kind of, we just got the sewer use fees to kind of explain to us. Am I jumping ahead of it? Okay, then I'll wait.
Anything else on the expense side people would like to ask about?
No.
Capital projects, maybe? Quick run through the capital projects?
Let's do that.
You have that, Joe.
We had a roofing project, as I recall.
Yeah, that's still to be done. I couldn't get anybody to even come look at it last fall.
Wow.
The roofing people are all pretty busy. But it still needs to be done. I still want to do it in this budget year.
Can I talk about the lighting upgrade?
Yeah. So we've got the $14,746 in there for the lighting upgrade. That includes all the fixtures outside as well as inside. The plan is to go to LED lighting.
Mhm.
A lot of our outside lighting doesn't work, or mostly just won't shut off. So we've had Horizon come around, and they've took a comprehensive look at what we really need, and so they've taken some fixtures out. I don't think they've added any, because I think with the LED lighting, you get a better light. But some of the fixtures, they'd shine up toward Len White's, and so our plan is to take care of all that, as well as the interior lighting, and hopefully there should be. I wish I brought that. There should be a cost savings, or it was like a 3-year payback.
Right.
In cost savings, which was pretty good for,
Very
we
good.
looked for at least a 5.
Very good.
Were there any other capital projects?
So we have some infrastructure projects planned to go along with what Public Works is planning to do on North Main Street. Joe has some structures, some manholes that need work, so we've programmed $25,000 to take care of those. Preparing for a pretty major project on Westwood Drive. Joe's looking for some engineering
Right, because we're
work.
looking from going from the school driveway up to the end. It's all old. I think it's asbestos cement pipe. I know it leaks. Some of the manholes are in really bad shape all up through there. And I suspect, I haven't verified that, but I suspect they'll want to get it out into the road. And right now it's straight on the edge of the right of way. So it's in people, we got one in somebody's driveway. We got some on the lawn where they always bury them up. We have to go find them every time we go clean them. And that's just the engineering.
Yep.
The project costs are in the next year.
Right.
I just want to double check.
Yeah.
A lot of engineering this year because we want to design Spencer Lane repairs.
These are identified in our master plan, our CSO master plan, is why they come up. Westwood Drive, of course, came up because Public Works plans to do work in there as well. So we just want to jump on with them.
Yep.
Spencer Lane just, I think, is on our own. It's under the master plan. And Chapel Road is trying to get ahead of Public Works. They're going to do work up in that area. We've got a 6-inch piece on the far end that we can't do much with because we can't TV it. We can clean it, but we can't TV it.
Excuse me.
And then every year, we've been putting in this miscellaneous
Right.
repairs. So if we had a miscellaneous repair that was actually 10 or 15,000, we'd actually break that out as a separate project and put the line there. But the idea being that it's getting more and more expensive for Joe to even do small repairs when we find a problem. So we just know we're going to spend some money there.
Any other questions on expenses, either for operation or capital? You would like to talk about revenue.
I would. So there are a couple of pieces. New information is going to be part of this. So if I confuse people, please stop me and I'll back up and try again. There are small revenue pockets in this budget. $38,000 of interest earned on our money in the bank for WPCF or our investments. $5,000 for interest on overdue bills. $2,800 for revenue that comes in when people pay off liens or lien charges, deeds. Those $350 we put in for rental of sewer equipment. Sometimes it's much higher than that. Sometimes it's much lower. So we put a little bit in and as a kind of the budget line. $500 for sewer applications and inspections. So when somebody is going to connect to new construction to the sewer mains, there is an application inspection connection fee that gets paid. So we have not seen the kinds of connection fees and application fees that we had 5, 6, 7 years ago when the big housing developments were coming in. But we have individual houses that come in, and I think based on the fact that we have no planned large new development, we're planning on just a couple of houses for that. So the major revenue generator in this department are the sewer billings. When I put this together, I was anticipating asking for a 25-cent rate increase starting in July and building in, so I built the budget based on that. What Joe and I figured out is Joe keeps data. I was running reports off our software system. We have a problem in part of and again, I'm getting out of my area of expertise. Behind the software system, when we pull a report, there are all these statements programming that the report has to go through. There is an issue with that. So when I go to pull an analytical report, it is overinflating the consumption data. We went back through to make sure that all of the consumption data for the billing is correct. So the live billing account collection accounts are fine. It's simply that analytical report. So what I have done is I've gone back to Joe's spreadsheet, which is right. Unfortunately, there is less consumption on that spreadsheet than I had been using for my budget assumptions. So we want to talk to you a little bit about what the rates would mean and what it would mean to the budget that's been proposed for you. So you have two sheets in front of you, the big one and the little one. Let's start with the big one. So with this big sheet, and I'll just go column by column, if that makes sense. The first column lists user fees. We bill on a rate for 100 cubic feet. So if you make it into that next 100 cubic feet, you pay for it. $4.95 per 100 cubic feet is our current billing rate. We charge a minimum of 1,200 cubic feet per customer per account per quarter. So if you did absolutely nothing and you just stayed at $4.95, we would only generate $1,517,494. It would mean that we would need to cut $62,506 out of the WPCF budget that has been proposed. I will tell you, I don't know how we would do that and maintain service level. There would be no increases to anybody if we did that. Then I went, if you look down, the formula is still the same. You notice that when we get to $5.20, which is a 25-cent per 100 cubic foot increase, we generate $1,557,406. It's $22,000 less than what the budget was built on. That could be satisfied by not putting money into reserves. I'm not a big advocate of that, but it could happen. If we looked at that, said 25 cents seems reasonable. Now let's talk about what that impact would be. If we started January 1st of 2020, so any bills that were run January through June, it would increase based on the university's current use pattern. The university would see a $17,235 increase in their sewer fees for the year. A customer who is billed the minimum would see a $6 increase in their sewer user fees for the year. For the year. So when I say an average residential user, I am basing that on 2,200 cubic feet of use per quarter, which is an average for a family of 4, industry kind of standard average. That would mean if we started in January, people who were average water users for a family would see an increase of $11 for the fiscal year.
Mhm.
If we started at that very same rate increase in July instead of January, we would bring in $1,594,135 in estimated. That would be our estimate. We don't guarantee what the sewer fee is because it is based on use, which would actually add $14,135 to our allocation to go to reserve. And the university would see $31,823.50 increase. A minimum user would see a $12 increase. And an average user would see a $22 increase.
Sorry for interrupting. So the $6 before for the minimum, that's not really for the year. That's for 6 months of this year.
No. So the $6 is the increase if we started in January, but it's the increase for the whole year.
Well, sure.
That,
If we
For
start
the
in
6
July,
months,
yes, it's
So
6
that-
months
from the
of
January.
So if it was if we're talking
The
about
end
a
of
full
June.
year, it's going to be $12.
So if we
Gotcha.
started it in July, it would be, yes,
So ongoing, the next fiscal year, provided there's no change, it would be still an additional $12
yes.
per year. Okay,
I
just wanted to
think
clarify.
you'll find me back here asking,
Is that?
probably find us back here asking.
Let's. We'll not go there yet. All right.
Yes. Well, I'm taking a page from Megan.
There we go.
Should always look at the future. The small sheet of paper, this one, takes you through the rate survey, which Joe does for me every year. So what that shows is that for $4.95 per 100 cubic feet, Town of Orono has the least expensive sewer fee, most definitely in the region, and also among like operations. If we increase to $5.20, we still have the lowest. So we are far under what everybody else is charging.
Can we go one more step,
Yes.
Sophie? Let's assume we want to be at least in the break-even area.
Yep.
In terms of revenue against current projected expenses. And let's assume we wanted to only impact it in January.
Yep.
We'd have to go down to a rate of
535.
535, right?
Yep.
And that would mean the university's increase would be 27,000.
Yes.
The residential increase would be 960 minimum, and the average use would be 1760. So the average use, I'm having a hard time following that.
So average,
The average use is increased if we only did, well, that makes sense. You got to make up that difference in 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I see. I got it. Well, I'm in favor of having enough revenue to offset expenses for sure. And it's going to be an easier decision noting that we are the lowest payer in the area. What do you think, folks?
Well, I kind of like understanding it's good that you've kind of laid it out this way, but I also think that bare minimum sometimes, although it may be advantageous for somebody who wants to look at something as $12 would be a lot or whatever, I almost want to say that we should slightly go above that point to be able to have the extra income to help with the projects that you're going to need in the future. Am I thinking of this properly?
So, in a perfect world, absolutely. And I would be right there with you. The issue that I have here is smaller. I don't think we're at the end of this
Right.
rate increase. I think we need to be mindful that the University of Maine is going to bear the brunt of this rate increase. And when we start in January, it helps them because they're only having to deal with half of it in this budget, and then they can deal with it for next year. I think that breaking even, allowing us to put the $25,000 into reserve is important, and 40 cents is a lot of a jump for 1 year. But I think that we're probably going to be back here for 10 or 15 cents next year. I do like when we implement in January because it gives us time for council to make the decision and then for us to make sure that all of our customers are aware and notified. We put it out with the bills for they get 2 bills before they have to pay the higher bill.
Yeah.
So I agree that January is definitely a preference, but I do want to be mindful of the university and we can't not charge them, but I think to do a stepped approach will make it easier. And it's not just the university. I mean, we've got the larger housing complexes and others that have substantial
Right.
bills.
So Sophie, if you had to make a recommendation, you'd look at the 25-cent increase beginning January.
I would look, if I had to make a recommendation, I would make a 35-cent increase
35.
starting January, as opposed to a 25
Oh, I
starting
gotcha,
in
yeah.
July.
Yep.
With just understanding that we'll be right back here talking about hopefully a smaller rate increase next year.
This is all sort of based on projecting that the usage will stay what it is now. But if something were to happen where usage were to drastically decrease for some reason,
That's part of our issue, is that over time, we did see a significant drop when the university went to low flow. People have been trying to get more efficient with their water use and they've done a great job. It has cut into our revenue stream, which is why we had started the increases. The projection that we've made here is a 2-year average. So I went back 2 years using Joe's build consumption data, and we are making our best estimate. Which is part of the reason why we run with a little bit of money in fund balance in this fund.
yeah, and don't get me wrong, I think it's great that they're using less. But
It just means you'll have to pay. So the lion's share of the cost of this service are fixed. It takes a certain number of people. We've got to manage a certain number of miles of collection
Sure.
system that's getting older. We've got the process and the plant is designed, whether we put a small number of gallons through or a large number of gallons through, the minimum cost is still a substantial one. Insurances, licensure are all fixed costs. And so when people decrease use, since that's our primary revenue stream, you're gonna pay more per 100 cubic feet, even if everything stayed the same. But there's operating costs that are going up as well, electricity, personnel costs.
This may be kind of hypothetical and maybe not the place for this right now, but I mean, given this trend is not going away, there seems to be greater emphasis on this simply on a planetary level and environmental level. Using your prognosticator hat, Joe, your fortune-telling crystal ball, I mean, what's on the horizon? Is this technology going the way of the dodo at some point? Or, I mean, what are we looking at for the future? What's the buzz? Is there a buzz?
The biggest buzz, I mean, I think the low flow shower heads, the low flow toilets, that's all going to continue as people upgrade. I don't think that our water usage is going to go back up because of that. Unless we grow something in Orono, but there's not much place to do it.
On the system, yeah.
But down the road, they were already talking about phosphorus limits, nutrient limits, phosphorus and ammonia or nitrate, and even in the Penobscot, DEP's been talking about that. We're just hoping that it doesn't go so low that we might have to go to tertiary treatment. Because biologically, there are limits that you can only bring it down so far. We've got biological nutrient removal in the plant. It was designed in when we built it in 2008.
This was cutting edge in 2000.
It was,
yeah,
absolutely. But now the limits are bypassing what we can possibly do. I just hope they don't do it in Orono, because I mean, we're still talking at 1,200 to 1 ratio of what we're putting in compared to what is going by. So our dilution factor is very, very high. So I don't know what they'll do with that. But they could just say, you're going to have to discharge at this limit.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So I guess I'd like to hear, and maybe tonight isn't the night to hear it, but to the general public, what is our explanation if in fact we raise the rate 40 cents, which is almost a 10% increase? But before I'm ready to to go with that, I'd want to hear the rationale that we're going to present to the public to say why in this year we need to raise our rates almost 10%, even though we're going to be on the low end of the area.
So I would say to that question, there are a couple of factors at play here. The first is that we've had to make some operating changes in order to fulfill our license requirements. We brought an additional person on a year ago to ensure that we had the ability to maintain the collection system the way that DEP was asking us to. So that was an important piece. We also brought debt on that when we refunded our debt. Refinanced, yes. There we go. We enjoyed a couple years down in the lower numbers, and then it spiked. And when in those lower years we put money into reserve, it spiked. We now are at a point where we do not have reserve funded. We're not fully we're not even picking up a reasonable percentage of depreciation for future needs for capital, for fixing the collection system and the the plant moving forward long-term, so we don't have to have huge spikes
Mhm.
in the rate. We're not seeing a huge increase in consumption, but we are seeing an increase in operating costs in terms of electricity and running the plant.
Mhm.
So that all kind of comes together in the perfect storm, Tom. And the fact is, for many, many years, we were really convinced that it was important to keep the rates low. And we can't, so we are not in a position to be able to say, putting money into reserves and fully funding, working towards funding future needs is, had we been raising the rates all along, we would be in a position to be able to continue doing that, but at a lower rate. But because we didn't raise the rates, we don't have that.
When was our last rate increase?
So we began a multi-year rate increase 3 years ago. So we started with a 6 cent and a 10 cent and a 10 cent, no, a 6 cent, a 10 cent, and a 25. Yep, 6, 10, 10, 25 cent increase. Our hope had been to incrementally
Mhm.
bring it up. I was not fast enough.
So if we increased the 40 cents for the half year, again, maybe not a question for tonight, but it would be good to get a sense of where we might be in another year.
I can, that 40 cents, if all things are, remain the same, if you look on your page, you're now looking at 1.624 to 1.64 million. So,
Yeah.
So compare that to 1,517,000, which is where we're at right now. So we would be bringing it up.
123,000.
Yep. And I think when you do that, Joe and I are not at this point projecting we're on a path now with the personnel costs. We're on a path, I think, with electricity. What we've projected now is running both sides, so hopefully we're not going to have to see an increase beyond that. So we'll be able to fund the reserves at back to a reasonable level with that. Helpful?
Yes, thank you. Other questions? So is this an issue that needs to be resolved tonight?
No, I would ask if there are questions you have for Joe, if we could ask those tonight. And if there are questions you think of that will probably be Joe's, if you can let me know. Because normally I wouldn't ask him to come to future workshops.
Yep.
Not that he wouldn't, but
Sure.
I try not to ask.
I think this rate increase is an issue that ought to come back when we meet as a full group.
So why don't we plan to talk about that on the 6th when we review the full budget? If there are major questions, if people could get them to me ahead of time to make sure that when I come, I have good answers for you so that you can make a decision.
Does that seem reasonable to you folks? Okay, good.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Now we're getting warmed up.
While we're waiting for Rob to get here, I will tell you I took a swing through the cemetery today, and if people haven't had a chance to take a look over the weekend, you might want to. He and his crew are doing a really nice job.
Well, I
in there.
took a swing through this morning and I took a swing through this afternoon and there was quite a difference.
So, want me to try to set up
Sure.
Public Works?
Thank you.
We talked quite a bit through the year, as we were making we came back to you for some help with assumptions for the Public Works, budget this year. So in general, the only major shift in the Public Works in terms of operation is we brought cemetery maintenance in-house. In the budget document, it's gonna look a little wonky to you.
Yeah.
Because we ended up moving to make it work for our payroll system. All of the full-time salary, except that of the town mechanic, now all lives in general maintenance. Overtime associated with the individual departments lives in the individual department, but the 40 hours a week times 52 weeks lives in general maintenance. So I wanted to give you a sense, since it's all moved all over the place, that in wages, we are up $28,184. In retirement benefits, we're up $8,367. This is across all Public
Yep.
Works.
That's okay.
Health insurance, $16,959 for a total increase in personnel costs of $55,665.42.
I think in the future years, it's going to be much easier to follow this way. It's a little complicated this year, but that information is helpful.
I thought you'd want to know the overall. So I don't know if you want to.
Yep. Anything else that you all set?
With this, I would just ask that we do operation, and then we've got another intro for capital infrastructure. Which
Okay,
is
so we'll stick to operations for now. Questions on operations?
I was curious about the contractor services for portable toilet facilities located at the landfill site and mattress demolition containers for the free weekend. I guess I
Yeah.
didn't know that we were demolishing mattresses and that required special containers. And anyway,
Well-
why has this increased?
No, we've always done it. I've sort of tried to bury it in the operations costs in the past. So I thought this time I would start to make it more clear where those funds were coming from. But what it is, mattresses are tough to deal with in a landfill. They take up a lot of space. They don't compact. They're just kind of one of the worst types of demo that we have to deal with in terms of how we put it in the pile. So we get about 100 mattresses over the course of the free weekend. So instead of simply just putting them up on the hill, I get demolition containers that we put those in and have them hauled away to Juniper Ridge so that we don't unnecessarily use up capacity in our landfill. And for what it costs, it's worth doing that to keep the capacity of the landfill under control.
I'm glad to see things like this kind of broken out, because I think that when we talk about amenities and what we're paying for living in this town, I think it's important to see that obviously you can think of free weekend at the dump as something that doesn't necessarily cost anything. It's just, oh, well, they just let us in and they just don't take our money for a day and they let us throw our stuff in the landfill, but no big skin off their nose. But we do actually pay for amenities such as demolishing mattresses, which I knew nothing about until now. So thank you for that.
Rob, under personnel costs, I had one question. There's a equipment operator whose salary went from 1542 to 2005, which seems like a gigantic increase in 1 year.
That is a reclassification, I think.
I beg your pardon?
Not an, that is,
Yeah.
yeah, that is a reclassification. We move people
Different person.
different.
I'm I'm not understanding, I guess.
So, we wanted to show the 3 leads at the top. So that's a mistake in our spreadsheet with the FY19 wage, Tom. Because we reclassified, we created 3
Yep.
layers of people, and we wanted to show all the leads at the top. So that is an error in the spreadsheet.
Okay.
The 1542, it means somebody else was there that was a lower paid person. So let me correct
Okay.
that and give you a new sheet.
Thank you. I was amazed that diesel fuel is going down 29%.
Yeah, so there's a couple things at play there. When we transitioned from the old facility to the new facility has a fuel island, which allows us to store in bulk and take bulk deliveries for both diesel and gasoline. That becomes an advantageous way to buy fuel as well, so that our costs are lower. And just over the last 2 or 3 fiscal years, each year you'll see that I've decreased it a little bit as I hone into what our actual usage is going to be. But also, we've actually had some changes in units. We've gone from a couple of the diesel units or gasoline, but also newer equipment is a little more efficient with fuel as well. So there's some operational changes kind of worked into there as well. It's not just simply a price decrease, but the bulk fuel at the fuel island at the new facility is
Well,
really
it's nice to see that.
driving that. Yeah.
Great. Never complain about a decrease.
I'm reasonably certain that I understand the explanation in the narrative, but I just thought it might be worth explaining in a little bit more detail under winter maintenance, the increase in clothing allowance, but it's not an increase in the stipend per person. If you could, what is the consolidation that led to that?
So you'll see so we used to have it distributed throughout the 5 departments, and now that's all consolidated. But also we've added the 2 positions that we've added also is included in that. So there's a little bit of an increase, but also some consolidation at the same time.
I'm just sort of remembering, was it last year or the year before, Judy taking issue with the amount of money people were allowed for clothing, and I just wanted to
Yeah, and keep in mind, included in that stipend, they are required to purchase their own safety shoes that we are requiring them to wear. So there's some required clothing that they have to purchase with those funds.
So in addition to winter clothing and safety boots, what would be other things that we'd require our employees to wear?
We ask them to wear pants, wear shorts, those types of things. We provide all the PPE, so all the personal protective equipment like vests, traffic vests, gloves, safety glasses, hard hats, those kinds of things. But some of the work that we do is simply kind of hard on their clothing. And since we require them, and we also require them to wear or to meet a standard, a professional standard, so that they're not out there with holes in their jeans and ripped shirts and things like that. So providing them a stipend to purchase that clothing allows us to hold them to that standard when I need to.
I had a question about and I'm kind of confused about. I understand workman's comp's always a thing. Why in this particular case there was nothing this year, then there's workman's comp, then it says nothing, not applicable for the increase. Was that located in a different spot?
Which budget
So-
are you looking at?
On page 23 at the very top.
It's on page 17, actually.
Mine says 23.
Yeah,
In the right spot, or
town garage.
the town garage side that was like, it has nothing listed as for workman's comp this year.
So there's nothing in the cemetery, nothing but $900 for next year.
So town garage.
Nothing last year, but $1,700 this year.
Was it just in a different location or something?
What we found last year is we were putting it all in Public Works before. The NCCI code was very specific to the garage this year. Therefore, we're breaking it out to show in each department. We'll be able to pull reports to see what's happening with workers' comp. So that's why we broke it out, just because the bill came with it broken out better for us.
I saw our Public Works Director filling holes on Bennett Road yesterday. So I'm surprised that asphalt is going down. Asphalt supplies are down.
Yeah, that was more, I kind of looked at spending over the last couple years and what we've used, and I haven't historically over the last couple fiscal years. I have two of those, so a winter one and as well as a summer one.
Okay.
So kind of depending on, what happens that year. I may not necessarily, I haven't been using all of it, so I just adjusted it
Okay.
down a little.
Good. Other questions?
I think the only other thing that I was curious about is just why the increase to unscheduled overtime. I mean, the narrative comments explain what that is used for, but why are we seeing a $1,500 increase for this year?
That, again, is a consolidation of some other, in the cemeteries, we used to have an overtime line in that. We've consolidated that into the general maintenance accounts, because you'll see that in the cemetery section, and that's to cover Saturday burials or burials that go late past the hours of normal operation. But the total amount is the same.
As Tom said, I think this will all make more sense next year.
Yeah.
It will, and
Yeah.
moving forward, I think it's going to be a better method for planning as well. So.
On the maintenance cost for the facility, Rob, there's a decrease, which is good. Are there any specific things that you're planning in terms of maintenance on that facility this coming year?
Well, you'll notice the facility maintenance accounts have decreased, but I've increased the HVAC system. So that's a little bit of shifting as we kind of get comfortable in the building in terms of what
Experience?
what needs, and to be more specific to where those funds are actually being spent.
Yep.
There isn't anything specific that we have planned. There's some general maintenance. The overhead doors take a regular maintenance. All of the inspections for the facility, like the crane and those kinds of things, fall into that sometimes. So, and in a 17,000 square foot building, something's gonna break. So, that's
Even a new
all
one.
It's the light switches, the overhead doors. The switches that operate those doors, see a lot of heavy use in inclement weather, so we've had a little bit of a time getting those kind of squared away. But with all of the changes in temperatures, and it's warm on the inside but it's cold on the outside, then you open the door and those have been pretty much the most heavily.
Well, it's a very nice facility, and we certainly want to keep it well maintained.
Absolutely.
Does anyone have any other line item issues before I ask a more philosophical question?
Ooh,
No? Okay.
no, I'm all set.
Okay, well, every year your areas of discussion include the pay-as-you-throw discussion. And I've asked about it the last 2 years in a row and have been satisfied with the discussion we've had around it and why it's not something that we've done. But in light of our new trash situation, has anything changed in the calculus of the feasibility of a pay-as-you-throw system?
Well, I think in some ways, yes. The character of our waste stream is always going to be very consistent. Where it gets sorted, is what can change, whether it be through behavior education, those kinds of things, or incentivizing participation. And under our PERT contract with the guaranteed tonnage penalties, it was always a very difficult balance between removing the recyclable material from the MSW stream and facing the possibility of paying penalties for not reaching our guaranteed tonnage versus paying less for processing, or it back then actually was revenue in the recycling stream. With the new situation with coastal processing, the tipping fee is always going to be half of the MSW fee, so you have that ratio no matter what the cost actually ends up being for tipping MSW, with no penalties associated with it. So if you look at it simply from the perspective of the operating budget, there very well may be some benefits to having your MSW stream generate some revenue, but also at the same time incentivize residents to put as much into the recycling side as they can, because the town pays less per ton to have that type of material processed. So I think if ever there were a year, I don't think it's something that we want to necessarily jump into in this budget process, but I think perhaps a goal for this coming fiscal year as we go into next year's budget conversation, it's a viable conversation more than it has been in the past.
So if I was going to just do the flip, so Rob and I don't often disagree. On this one, I think.
We don't disagree, I'm just.
Yes, but on this one, I think he is we're not 100% on the same page. We are on the same page in that I do think that it should be something that council begins to evaluate in general as we evaluate what the difference in our processing will mean for us moving forward. So just a couple of points. The first point I would make is to remind council that all of our taxpayers who have 3 units or more, in terms of houses with 3 or more units, are already doing pay-as-you-throw. So when we think about implementing pay-as-you-throw, we are talking about a third of our waste stream.
It's actually
decreased.
It's getting closer to 25 than 33. Yeah.
Okay, so about a quarter of our waste stream, and so then I am channeling my inner Tom Perry when I look at I remember his argument of, are we decreasing people's taxes enough to make the bag charge fair? Are they, and I think it's harder to do that when you're looking at an average of $170,000 home. So just kind of keep that in mind. I don't think that you'll get the same kind of impact that you get when a community goes from nothing to pay as you throw for everyone. The second, and it's not information that Rob has because I learned it at the meeting yesterday, my trash meeting yesterday. What Coastal is seeing, it's taking waste in. Our waste went today and our recycling went today
Both
to Coastal.
recycling and waste.
What they're seeing are that communities with pay-as-you-throw systems in place are seeing a much higher degree of contamination in their recycling material. So while you might get it through, you're definitely not getting the same quality recycling. So just something to kind of keep in mind. I do think that as we get through the implementation of the coastal disposal, there's a lot for us to unpack with that and decide what we want to do. The other thing I would say is, at a time when we're limiting what can be recycled because of the global restrictions on recycling imports, I would really hesitate to say, here is your option. Take it all out of the trash and put it over here, but you can't really put a lot in it. I think we need some space to get people used to the current, and hope. What I heard yesterday from people who know more than I do is that we should actually begin to see recycling markets open up within the continental U.S. that will allow us to begin to get value for a wider array of recycled materials. Take some time.
Well, I appreciate both of those perspectives. I do want to note that both of them are budget driven and numbers driven. And I think one thing I'd like us to sort of just keep in mind and kind of interject into the conversation as we have it is that there are a lot of people in this town that would be motivated by environmental reasons for wanting people in general to reduce the amount of waste that they produce across the board, and to incentivize reducing the amount of waste that they produce, regardless of how it plays out on the budget balance sheet or the tax bill.
When we look at the long term, since you want us to look longer term, one of the conversations that Rob and I had today is most definitely aimed at reducing the amount of material that we're putting into our landfill. It is filling up faster than projections. And if I put my money hat on, we expected it to last for 30 years, and we're on path for it to last for 20 years. It is expensive to close. It is expensive to open another cell. So one of the things that we are talking about with the fee structure for the landfill is trying to really look at what the purpose is for the landfill. In Rob's fee schedule that's going to come before council, we're looking at saying, the landfill is really for our residents. It's for people when they are doing a small project. You're going to rip out your bathroom. You need a place to put your construction demolition debris. That's where it goes. It's for us to collect mattresses and for Rob to decide what's the best way to take care of them. It is really not designed to take a whole house that has been demoed. It is really not designed for
So that was happening.
Yep,
Has happened.
it has happened. It's not designed for a business that is operating to be coming in 3 times a week with loads of demo material. So one of the things you will see in the fee structure is the sticker that we had talked about. Everybody would buy a sticker on a calendar year, so we would launch it in 2020, sorry. No, we're gonna launch it July?
We would launch it
Okay.
in July.
So-
Honor the current system so people who have permits now will still be able to use them, but make that transition
Yes.
July 1st. Yep.
But we would then separate the difference between residential debris coming in, commercial debris, and limit the amount of commercial debris that we would allow in, that's our proposal. It would allow us to lengthen the life of the landfill and keep it here for our residents.
So commercial debris is debris brought in by a contractor regardless of whether it was all generated in Orono or not,
Supposed to be
No.
generated in Orono.
right?
Have to be generated in Orono to be accepted one way or another. Whether
Question, pretty hard to
Yeah.
determine that.
It is.
But again, commercial would be contractor bringing it in.
I would say commercial would be the Avenue, even the university, where you get
Yeah.
those massive, everybody leaves couches behind, or everybody, I
Mhm.
don't think we want them in our landfill. I don't know if we make it a different line than the 3 units or more, if we say you can have up to a certain number of units. But one of the issues we have is that every year you drive around town and at the multifamily dwellings, you've got couches and all sorts of stuff out there.
Mattresses.
Most of those end up in the landfill, and it's just they're bulky and they're taking up a lot of our volume.
But when we discuss the fee schedule, that's when we'll be talking about that, and
Right.
you'll have a little bit more opportunity to ultimately, it's up to council to decide what line is drawn for where the residential and commercial line is drawn. Right now, there really isn't a formal mechanism to limit the volume that a customer can bring in.
Right.
As long as it's sourced in Orono. So that's what we're concerned about, with the risk of protecting the available capacity at the landfill.
Okay. Other questions before we move on to capital? Anything else? Let's go to capital.
So, Tom, we have about 30 minutes left.
Yep.
And my thought was that Rob could kind of walk you through what has us concerned and see how far we can go, and if we need to talk about specific projects, or it would be great if we could get a little bit of feedback from those counselors who are here about whether they want to change the way we're looking at this.
Okay.
So, do you want to open up and talk? Want me to?
Yeah, go ahead. What do you want me to? So the capital proposal that you have before you includes North Main Avenue, engineering for Main Street, 2 paving projects on Orono Landing Road and Old Kelly Road, a third at Riverdale, and then engineering for a drainage issue on Margin Street, and design for a drainage upgrade in the College Heights, Chapel Road neighborhoods, as well as some clearing and ditching on Westwood Drive in preparation for a paving project that we decided to delay to allow for the school project, should it be approved, to be completed before we put new pavement on that road, which I would assume would be a major thoroughfare for construction during that time. When we prepared this budget, it was back in January and February. Since then, particularly over the last 2 months, there has been a significant change in the construction cost market, particularly at the state level. So I think you may have seen in the news, the DOT over the last couple months has actually rejected some contractors' bids. Probably the most notable one was down in southern Maine, where a $9.5 million project was bid for $19 million. There's a lot of factors at play, but the primary driver right now is the labor market. The labor market has become more expensive, but also very sparse. So a large paving company, even though they'd love to do all kinds of work, can't hire quality labor because everyone is already employed. So their capacity to complete these projects is full. So they are bidding projects that they know they'll either have to use accelerated schedules for. All types of different factors go into play there, which leads to a higher bid. Whether that's a trend or a bump in the road, I guess we are about to see. But here in this region, we've also been affected by this trend. A 3-part project recently was bid that had projects in Old Town Orrington and Brewer. That was a $1.2 million estimate. The bid was 2.1. The DOT decided, along with the local planning, I'll talk about it in a second, to reject those bids because there weren't enough funds available. Even if they had wanted to award it, it was somewhere in the round of $800,000 that needed to be found to fund this project and simply wasn't there. So what that means to Orono is that some of the projects that we would have relied on for regional support, so state highways, the primary ones that Sophie mentioned earlier are Forest Avenue, Park Street, and Kelly Road. You haven't seen those on your capital plan because we were going to hopefully work through the regional planning process to get the state to fund those projects. And then we've done this in the past. You've seen we've done usually a 10% match for a project. Those funds simply aren't there for the next 3 fiscal years. Right now, the Bangor Area Comprehensive Transportation System Policy Committee, which I happen to chair, is working with fewer funds than we have, or there are more projects than we have funds to cover. There's about a $2.4 million allocation to this region through the BACS process. We typically get about a $20 million need list. We usually pare that down in some reasonable way to the 2.4 million. But it's just kind of a representative look at how much need for infrastructure funding there is, both at the federal, state, and now local level. My concern is that the condition of the roads that we have within the compact, primarily Forest Avenue, Park Street, and Kelly Road, can't wait 4 years, 4 or 5 years, without some significant investment. Now, just as for context, I did estimates for a basic 10 to 12 year surface treatment. So mill the surface, pave it, a little more than just a paving job, but not a full reconstruction. For the areas of Park Street, Forest Avenue, and Kelly Road of highest concern. And those estimates come to about $1.4 million. About 370 on Park Street, 750 on Forest Avenue, and another 250 on Kelly Road. So I guess the question is whether at this point, how do we address these needs? And ultimately, kind of like what we have to do at the regional and state level, and how we have to do things here every single year, there are projects that need to be done now that we simply can't fund. And so how we prioritize the Orono Landing Road over Park Street is tough, because you got 15,000 cars on Park Street each year. I don't know what the count is on Orono Landing Road. I'm assuming it's considerably less. But the condition of the road and the need for repair is the same. So when you think about priorities, you have to start looking at safety of the traveling public for all modes. So Park Street sees pedestrian traffic, bicycle traffic, a lot of commercial freight traffic, and buses above and beyond the normal vehicular traffic that you see everywhere. So when you look at how to address the greatest need, Park Street's needs tend to overmatch some of the smaller local streets. Historically, we've been able to spend our tax dollars, our local funds, on the smaller side streets and rely on state and federal funds to keep up with the larger routes. Unfortunately, the current market looks a little bit more bleak in the next 4 or 5 years. So we may need to consider investing in some of those roads with local funds.
When we hear so much talk about federal infrastructure, and you think at one point it's going to move forward, and another point maybe it's not going to move forward, how does that play into this statewide need, I wonder?
So oftentimes, and I am wondering as well, I'm giving you just I don't have any inside information, I wish I did. But oftentimes when they talk about federal infrastructure, of course they're talking about the main thoroughfares, the federal highways.
Interstates and
But oftentimes they are borrowing funds that then come out. That's how ARA came about. So there was now money available for local grants to local regional and local entities. So I would think if you start, that funding would eventually kind of make its way down through the system to some local roads, but not likely town roads. I would say the state aid roads are major roads, Park Street.
Yeah, DOT has a 4-tier priority level for roads, and local roads are always 4, of course, but then even, for example, Forest Avenue is a 3, so it's going to see, it's the least likely to be funded from us at a state level project.
So when Rob and I talked about this yesterday, after it became very apparent from the BAC's policy committee meeting that we were very lucky to get the increase in the culvert project funded through BAC's, so that we should have adequate funding in 2022 to do the culvert. We just have to wait a little bit to be able to do it. The major issue is the money. It's not even a matter of if different people were on the board, they'd do something different. The money has now been allocated until 2023. So our question is, we think every project that we have asked to be funded for this year is very important. There is not a throwaway project on this list, and there are ones that when I even push to, could we move it forward? You know, Rob's answer is always, well, you can do whatever you want, but I'm afraid that a really good rainstorm is going to create this, or, you know. So I think we've stretched the local stuff, but that $1.4 million of full cost is something that would have cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of $140,000 total, which is easy for us to kind of plug in when we can get the money. We've seen that happen with the shuffle. We just are kind of at a loss because we don't see it as a reasonable thing to add $1.4 million just to the request, because we don't have that money. So,
But I also know through the process, the probability at this point, infrastructure condition versus investment has fallen so far behind that getting a project like Forest Avenue funded on a regional basis, so compare Forest Avenue against Wilson Street, State Street, Hogan Road, Route 2, heck, even in our own town, we can find roads that probably have a more significant regional impact. Getting a project like Forest Avenue funded with regional funds is becoming less and less and less likely.
I think the other piece is that Rob has been a tremendous advocate for the town at the regional level, which has allowed us to get culvert money, money for the roundabout, money to do pieces of College, you know, the intersection of College and Park, and we did an overlay on College and Park. We've done little bits.
Bennick Road.
So we've had these big projects and gotten state funds. And then we've also advocated for improvements to the Stillwater College Ave intersection in Old Town, because we think that that is a major contributor to some of our traffic issues here, and also the bridge over the Stillwater in Old Town, because we think that is a major contributor to some of our traffic issues here. So Orono has been a pretty high receiver on a percentage basis if you think about the size of our community. And it's a whole region. So one of the things that people are also looking at is who's been to the well and who's borne the cost of infrastructure. And we just have a tremendous advocate, so we keep able to kind of feed into the line. But
Yeah.
So that's our concern, and we wanted to bring that up before you went through we wanted some feedback from you as to how you want to proceed.
Well, it puts me in mind of the testimony that you gave down in Augusta last month about revenue sharing, because I look at the projection for the impact on general taxes over the years, and I mean we're looking at the new normal being more than $500,000 of an increase in its impact on general taxes. I mean, when we looked at what was budgeted for last year of a little over $500,000, and then we see these very steep increases, and by the time we get to 21, 22, the new normal is now over $1 million. And we, at the same time, I'm sure all of the other counselors have the same experience out in the public. Folks come up to you and say, I pay all this money in taxes and the sidewalk in front of my house is crumbling. When is that going to be fixed? I hear that very often. Well, partly because I used to live in the Hillside Road area where the sidewalk is disintegrated. But I hear it often. And it's one of those things where people, the vice is tightening. People are paying higher and higher taxes here. They are looking at what's happening directly in front of their house or what impacts their life on a day-to-day basis, especially in terms of things like crumbling infrastructure. And all that we have to say to them right now is this projection of the new normal in terms of what the impact of repairing that infrastructure, which is necessary, is going to have on their taxes. and yet we don't see the relief yet to help offset that.
Had things not, had you not gotten this bad information, what had you expected the timetable to be on Park Street, Kelly Road, and Forest Avenue?
Well, at that point, it was 2 years out for Park Street, but we had actually funded an MPI, so a municipal partnership initiative project with the DOT. It's another source of funds that we've worked with in the past. Those funds are also now being gobbled up, sort of as a reaction to the limited funds that BAX has. So all of a sudden now throughout the region, larger communities are reaching into that pot, and those funds aren't available anymore either, or more difficult to get. I was somewhat pessimistic about getting Forest Avenue done through the BAX process anyway, which is why you saw it as an MPI project a couple of years out. It was in the 21, it is currently in this request in there as a MPI, but this is only the smallest piece, so the shorter from Noyes Drive to Bennick Road, the in-town piece. So we really didn't have the entire the urban compact area that we would be responsible or could be responsible for maintenance of goes from the interstate in. So everything east of the I-95 corridor is within the compact, which makes it an urbanized area. Everything out beyond that is state maintained. So ultimately, to answer your question, Tom, we really didn't have, even the proposed budget, if nothing had changed on the regional and state level, didn't have a great plan for that. I shouldn't say we have a great plan for it, but I was a little less optimistic about being able to leverage those funds. Sort of hoping that after we got through the roundabout project, culvert projects square and funded, I'd be able to begin at least getting Park Street taken care of. But over the last, like I said, over the last 8 weeks, there's been a pretty significant change to that. And, there will be no new projects added to the regional work plan until FY 2023.
In my previous life as a councilor up north, we had a very similar issue. However, we were a small community with a double township. Not a lot of state roads, there was lots to maintain. It became a big issue with individuals having it was the same kind of comment about I pay taxes because I don't have kids. All I want's a nice road. Just give me a road, and that's a very common thing that you hear. However, there was also a sentiment about how when you put something in, whether or not somebody's actually taking care of it. So what we had to do, and in our world, it's an agricultural place, which now in the day they had the kind of the flat beds with the potato barrels on them they were actually built for that kind of structure. Now there are these massive potato trucks they're bigger than 18 wheelers in some cases that are just tearing it up. So the investment had to be made. So we as a community determined that we had to say, okay, where are we at with all the roads, sidewalks, all that stuff in a 10-year plan. And we had to go out and get a loan to get us to where we needed to be. But there was the way the community bought into it was to say that we have a strict plan that says that all the roads were defined as this year, these are taken care of. And so it's not all of a sudden everybody's looking at it going like, wow. So I guess through the process of when we go through this, I think something has to be put in place to say that as we repair these things, it's just, it's going to be maintained as we go.
So I don't disagree with anything that you say, but I do want to make sure people understand that Rob has a multi-year plan. And every year between me and the council, I push to get to the budget, and then oftentimes we push ahead. So the fact is that Rob does a great job maintaining the roads. When you look at Essex Street, which is on our 5-year plan, that is here because when I first got here, we put binder down and then we did the surface. And what he's saying is we got to protect that. It's cheaper to put surface on. We want to be able to do that. That's why it's on the plan, to be able to maintain it. The problem comes in when you're funding, a small percent of your infrastructure needs. Your criteria now needs to shift to this is crumbling. And so like Gardner Road doesn't have a ton of traffic. I said to Rob, is it possible? Could we get away without doing Gardner Road? And as Rob always says, well, you can do whatever you want, but understand that we're going to end up having to dig the whole thing up, and it will add incredible cost to the job, which is why Gardner Road got funded for this current year. So, I think we're in this jam where in the past, Rob would go work behind the scenes with DOT and VAX and come back and say, ooh, I've got this, and you can have a $700,000 project for $70 and $70,000, and just how are we going to work 70,000 in? Well, that became a lot easier to be able to finesse the 5-year plan to be able to take those little bites. But now they're big bites that are more, quite frankly, they're more than what we've gotten to with the whole plan. We should be funding close to $1 million. I believe we should be funding $1 million a year in infrastructure improvements. We can't afford that. And so that's kind of where we're at. Do we just hope like heck the world changes and stick with the original priorities that we had listed for town roads that are, we think, desperately needed? Or does council want us to flip everything on its ear, take care of North Main Avenue because we need to take care of it, and it's out to bid right now, so we'll hopefully be able to get that first phase. We've broken it into phases. But, we're trying to figure out what you guys want us to do, and we wouldn't be doing our jobs if we didn't bring it to your attention.
If you take North Main Avenue out of the mix, there's only $220,000 in the proposed budget for road reconstruction.
Yes. Yes.
That's assuming we can get prices that are somewhere near what we're estimating them, and you've made me wonder whether that's going to happen, Rob, based on what's been happening around the state on pricing. And we didn't plan to do any of these roads this year, Park, Kelly, or Forest.
No, normally like I was saying, Tom, normally what happens is that Rob starts the conversations, gets some buy-in, and then we thread it into the plan. And because we haven't gotten any buy-in, we haven't threaded anything into the plan.
We don't have any good options.
No. And I know that's usually I come to you with options, as I see it. We can based on my conversations with council, my sense is that council is not interested in raising an additional $200,000 to $700,000 for infrastructure improvement. I am not a fan of borrowing money for infrastructure improvements like this. So we go out and borrow $1.4 million and we still have to add the debt payment in and continue to do the work, which will increase the budget that is already stretched, that you guys already asked me to reduce. Most years we're trying to reduce it. So borrowing is a tough one.
Challenge with that is, depending on how the borrowing is structured, the investment may not necessarily last as long as the payment.
So
You know, like I said, the treatments that I estimated to get to the 1.4 million are at best 15-year fixes. So borrowing $1.4 million on a 15-year note is a big investment.
So then we look at, is the thing for us to do to see if the world is going to change in the next 9 months and keep this year's plan the same and hope that the roads stay together the best we can, and come back next year with perhaps a significant increase in revenue sharing, perhaps a federal commitment to better funding transportation. That is, they were not going to be paved this year anyway, even if we had gotten state funds. So I think what Rob and I are not struggling with, but our concern is that council needs to be able to make its decisions with all of the information. And the landscape is shifting as we are trying to put this budget together. And we wanted to have an open conversation with you and get some feedback as to what your level of comfort is. Well, we still have time to go do research and create options.
Well, as I said, I don't think there are any good options here, but I guess at this point, I'd be leaning towards sticking with the plan that we had in place for this year. We did not plan to do any of those roads this year anyway. Hope that things are going to improve. There's certainly a chance revenue sharing is going to improve. We're anticipating it improving this year. We're anticipating it improving again next year. And maybe the significant federal effort for infrastructure will actually come to pass within the next year. I guess that's where I'd be.
I would agree that sticking to the course that we've been on, to me, that would be the option for two reasons. One, hopefully, as Tom said, there will be some changes that will help with the impact. But if they don't, I mean, I've said this in previous years, it's not an option that I like, but the fact of the matter is that the town has done an incredible job over the last several years shielding or softening the blow of a lot of things that are out of the town's control at the state and federal level. And though residents still are not always happy with the tax bill every year, it's been, I think the impact has been soft enough that the focus can be directed fairly or not, probably I would say unfairly, at the town and say, well, why don't we cut costs and why don't we, and looking at the municipal, the local level. And at some point there has to be a tipping point where people stop looking to the local level and start looking and advocating at the state and federal level, because there are things happening that are out of our control that are squeezing local taxpayers and that we cannot change. And we cannot allow our roads to fall apart for I mean, not just the quality of life and traffic, but safety. I mean, we need to protect our infrastructure. And I hope that we'll see some change with federal infrastructure initiatives that are talked about and never realized, and with revenue sharing. But if we don't, then as much as I don't want it to happen, I think perhaps if that's the thing that lights a fire under voters to take their concerns to the place that they can be addressed best, then I think that would be helpful. So I don't want that to happen, but I think staying the course with our current plan either way, whether we see relief or not, could potentially bring about a lessening of the burden one way or another.
Any other feedback?
I agree, and I'm having a hard time coming up with the words to sort of throw my spin on this. And I think, yeah, with as far as this was right in front of us, yeah, I'd say stay with as what we had originally planned. I agree with Megan's sentiment. I think the repercussions of that don't necessarily need to be just focused at the state. Certainly don't need to just be focused here, but it's a matter of, I think, is highlighting that we need to find new ways of thinking and approaching different problems like this too, as far as revenue. I mean, what are our options? Always revenue sharing would be great for that to go up, or we go to taxes, or we expect the university to suddenly realize they should pay more, or what. But none of that is.
Don't forget about school funding.
Well, yeah, no, but it's like, so what do we do? But it's just talking about how we run this. It's like, what can we do to increase revenue? I mean, there's a great question there, but waiting for it to come in on the back of a big old truck would be lovely, but that's not going to happen. So where do we go to make that happen?
So my guidance would be that we are going to have to hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Because I, as an individual who basically for 20 plus years that my businesses have dealt with government monies completely, insurance for Medicare, Medicaid kind of processes, I can be up one day and in the hole the next and not even know what just happened. And that's government. But I think that if we look at a budget type thing, that infrastructure, I mean, there's passions obviously that people have about certain things, but I think infrastructure is a critical thing. And if we start to let things just fall apart, then we really are going to be in even a much bigger mess than these things. So as we go through it, yes, I would say stick with what we currently have, but I think we need to prepare with the mindset that there's a possibility that we're not going to get what we normally get, and we have to adjust accordingly.
Did you get the feedback you needed?
Yep.
Can you live with it? I hope.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think from our perspective, I don't think we expected to hear turn this on its ear. But like I said, council and people who are paying attention and concerned about their taxes, who might be listening to this workshop, I think it's important for people to understand that there is a substantial risk sitting out there that might hit us in the next 2 to 3 years. Right?
Yeah, I don't know that I would use the word might, but
Will,
you know, it also I think is important, and we often have this conversation at this time about while $1 million sounds like a lot of money, and I certainly could find ways to use it. When you look at infrastructure investment, the $1 million request doesn't represent the need, and we, you know,
right.
Just that's like Sophie said. This conversation was more of a to make sure that everybody understood that the need certainly outweighs the funding availability.
And it's not just Orono,
Absolutely not.
every place that's facing the same issue, so.
I would argue that in many ways, Orono has stayed in a pack of a few communities that are continuing this level of infrastructure investment, that there are others that have totally abandoned their infrastructure plans, and that will be a problem.
We said we were going to try to end by 8. It's after 8. The only other major capital item in Public Works is the truck that we have already committed ourselves to, so there's no real argument about that. We agreed to go out to bid early.
So
It's not too late to change our mind.
you,
And that's gone out to bid already, Rob, I
Will
assume.
be shortly.
Anything else?
so the only other thing is to put in front of you, I think we're doing a great job getting through the budget, but I wonder if we maybe should schedule an additional budget workshop on June 3rd in place of comp plan implementation. So we would have another budget workshop to be able to do library rec and some straggling things. You seem to have some bigger items that to reach some consensus on that we would normally do the last night. And I'm a little bit nervous just because we've had some counselors not able to fully participate, that you will need the full night for that.
So we're looking at Monday, June 3rd.
Yes,
I think that's good.
6 to 8,
Big part,
6 to 8.
I will add it.
If that's all right with you.
Yep. That's good.
I really appreciate your time.
We all set? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? We're done?
All right, let me just go turn off this.
You're on comp plan and finance. So you have that in your calendar anyways.
What is it? It really